Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. If you recall, in the last session, we had started our discussion on the communication process. During that session, I had also talked about the model, wherein we had discussed the source, the message itself, the medium, and the target and receiver, and then we had finally connected them through the feedback loop. We had explained all of that, and then we had started the discussion on the source, the initiator of the message. Remember that we have been constantly talking about the way the person or a consumer gets influenced. And all this discussion relates to basically the communication which will bring a message from the marketer to the consumer. And the critical point here is that we must understand that the message that is being given by the source or the organization must be understood in exactly the same way as it is intended by the source to be understood by the target or the market. Confusions can occur. People may not believe the message. That means credibility might be affected. And this credibility is what is very critical, because even if you have tried your level best to put the message in exactly the same form as you want it, and therefore you've encoded the message in the particular form that you want to state, the meaning is also very clear, but unfortunately, people just may not believe it. So the credibility issue becomes very critical. Now, it is therefore very important to understand the basic concept of credibility and how does it link with each aspect of this chain or this model of the communication process. So we will discuss in this session the credibility of the source. We had already covered a part of it in terms of the informal source, and we had established the fact that the word of mouth is very critical, and that is why marketers try and seek those sources which are not directly linked with profit making of the organization. And we had suggested that one of the major reasons for people starting to doubt a message is that if they find that the message is aimed to make profit, and this profit is actually going to accrue to the spokesperson, then the message loses its credibility. Here, what we need to also remember, which we had discussed last time, is that source of the message is normally the organization which wants to put the information or the message to the consumer. But there is a spokesperson which will say the message, which will actually put the message forward. So it could be, like we had discussed, a kind of a commercial, a kind of opinion leader, a kind of a salesman, media message. All these are messages which are being located in various mediums. And the idea is that we must distinguish the two. For example, sometimes we normally call the model or the spokesperson also the source. However, we must understand that the source is actually the organization, and the organization is using some other person, some medium, some framework to communicate this message. So we must distinguish the two, because as we go along in this lecture, we will understand that sometimes people, the listeners, the target, confuses the two. And it is therefore very, very critical that people, the marketer, recognizes this issue and does not allow the organization and the source or the spokesperson to stand so separated that people would not believe the spokesperson, even though the organization would be believed. So we will come into that. Now what we are saying is that there is the informal framework. We have talked about the importance of it. We have said that publicity seems to be more significant in terms of credibility, and we think that people would believe the area where the market does not assume that they will be the people to benefit from it. And that is why we need to make sure that even if it's a salesperson, he tries to project that the benefit is to the consumer and not to himself, even though we all know that salespeople do get bonuses for making a sale. But it is his quality which will obviously impact on the credibility. So today, we will start with the credibility of the commercial source, and we need to understand what is the commercial source. So it is, like I said, it can be anything like advertisement, salesperson's pitch, maybe the advertisement in a newspaper or in a magazine or on a commercial or a TV. And we have to understand all these sources and how their credibility gets affected. It has to be very clearly understood that one of the major factors which will impact the commercial source, because obviously people are aware that whatever this commercial ad is, or the message is, or the communication is, it is to actually generate profit for the organization. So that is understood. Now we have to know how can we build credibility in this message, though we have this weakness sitting there, whereby any message will be interpreted that iska fayda jo hai wo organization lega. So usme ek inherent, inbuilt credibility issue hai. So usme jo pehli cheez we need to be making sure is to understand the past performance of the organization. In terms, if we know that all times when a communication was given by the company, it was accurate and it proved its worth in terms of if it was promoting a product, the market accepted the product exactly as stated by the organization, and they found the results better than whatever was communicated. It is totally understood that any further communication from that organization would be more credible because they have past history of being honest and being totally coming up to the standards. Now, in the same context, if we understand that an organization has good quality products, so any new product launched by the company using the background or the communication of quality will find that this new product and the message regarding this new product will be accepted, will be more credible. For example, we can talk about all the car models that we have, like Toyota. If a person has been satisfied by buying, let's say, Corolla, then if a new car is being launched, let's say Altis or maybe, let's say, Cressida or whatever, people will tend to believe it more. And that is where significance of maintaining a standard and never allowing the product to fall below the standard is critical. That is why we have a number of efforts made so that the quality is maintained throughout. Rather, there is a concept called constant improvement in products or constant quality improvement cycles, which aims to make sure that there is no slippage within the product categories or product brands which are launched by our organization. Let's take another step, and we should also look at, and it's very common with the companies like Lever Brothers and P&G, which have a number of products and brands, and we need to make sure that we understand that whenever a company which has already got successful brands in the market, their new brands or new product categories launched by them will be received with the same credibility, with the same enthusiasm, with the same image that they have already created in the market. And that is why we talk constantly of brand equity. Now, we should understand basically, and I have already repeated it before, but it's no harm in recapitulating what this concept of brand equity is. Now, brand equity means added value which comes because of the name or the brand that is given to the product. To little bit understand this a little bit more, which we have already discussed in terms of consumer values, is that if there is a product which has no brand and it is a generic product, and then we add a brand name, this generic product, which is same, because of the added brand name, its value in terms of price will grow. So the same generic product using different brand names of different companies will result in the value also changing for each brand. The higher the added price value that will come from a brand will be its brand equity. And that is why we keep saying that products must ensure the target of all brand management activities is to create brand equity. And the logic is the same, that it facilitates leveraging the brand into different product categories, as well as putting new products under the same brand umbrella. So we have already discussed that, but it's important to emphasize it now from the point of view of communication. Now, the fifth aspect that comes into position relates to spokesperson itself. It is understood, and you would have seen that now celebrities, particularly many celebrities, are being used by different brands to be the brand ambassador. For example, even United Nations has brand ambassadors. And the reason is that it is assumed that the personality of the spokesperson who is being selected as a brand ambassador becomes critical. We know that Angelina Jolie is a brand ambassador to not only products, but also to the United Nations for her work in the children area, particularly where UNICEF is concerned. So we get this a brand ambassador concept. We also find a number of models who are brand representatives, particularly if you recall, sometime back, Tiger Woods was the brand ambassador for the TAG Heuer watch. Now, it is very, very important to understand what happens there, and I'll use this example, which has just been currently done, to establish the fact that the image of the spokesperson becomes a very critical point in the communication process. Now, Tiger Woods has been not only for TAG Heuer watch, but for a number of other products. But the minute his image was affected, if you have been reading the newspapers or listening to the news, there was a problem with his image. He has dropped off the golfing tournaments. He was obviously the number one in the golf tournament around the world. He was considered to be an icon because in a very young age, he had been able to achieve a very high standard in golfing, had won a number of events, so he was selected by a number of brands to represent them as brand ambassador. But the minute a problem, his own personal problem came about, which actually affected his image among people, and people, since they hold these ambassadors in very high esteem, this esteem was affected. So the immediate reaction from the company was that they withdrew him as brand ambassador and canceled all the contracts. Now, this behavior of organization is very strongly reflected of the point that I'm making, that the image or the attractiveness of the spokesperson as the brand ambassador is critical. So it is not only that the company has to make sure that they select an individual who is held in very high esteem among the people for which the market is targeted on, but it is also incumbent on the ambassador, the brand ambassador, to ensure that during his contract, nothing happens which will tarnish his image. So the significance of the credibility of the source comes from this small example. Another point that is important is, and this also links up with our marketing strategy, because one of the critical strategic issues in marketing is to select outlets. It is very important. And I will be giving a very major example. I repeat this example normally in one or two occasions, because every time this example is given, it fits in with the logic of credibility and how the consumer will react. Consumer basically reacts because he believes that he is either being crooked, or he is being made use of, or he is actually being benefited from without due value given to him. So we need to avoid that. And therefore, one of the decisions which is very critical, which we do in marketing, is the choice of the retail outlets. And that is why when we talk about retail outlets, we should understand that if a product is being launched as a very high quality product, then if we place it in a Perchun ki dukan, which is a very small shop in a location which may not be of a high end, so what will happen is that the consumer is always going to be hit by the message which is coming through of a very high quality product, and the assumption in the mind of the consumer is that it is of a high value, high price. Therefore, contradiction is coming in, because Perchun or a shop outlet in small localities is normally for cheap products. Therefore, we will have a kind of a contradiction and may have a very major impact on the message that is being communicated in terms of a very high quality product. So we need to understand that there is a direct linkage between these two, the message as well as also the outlet that it is being sold. So there has to be a strategic alignment between the two. Finally, we will come to an area from where we will draw the concept which is now moving in, which is known as corporate branding, and that is that sometimes, or rather more often, companies who are involved in corporate social responsible behavior, which means they are also contributing to issues which are confronting the environment or the society, and people are aware that they are putting in an effort in trying to bring improvement, companies and their messages will be assumed to be more credible, because people see them as having a kind of a pro bono concept, which is basically pro bono means good of the people. तो लोग जो companies हैं जो good of the people के लिए भी काम कर रही हैं, तो उनको they give more value, which actually draws us into the concept of corporate branding. Now, we know that products are branded, but actually companies are also branded. And there's a big debate going on whether a corporate branding is more important, or would you brand the product, which is more important. And we see that sometimes companies do tend to combine the two and use both in the same frame. But rationally, there is this major debate, because it is assumed that corporations or corporate branding, which involves, like, for example, cause-related marketing, is more significant in developing credibility in messages. Now, what is basically cause-related marketing? Sometimes you might find along the roads and small, panels which are showing that if you buy a product, then a percentage of that product or the revenue or the profit will be contributed towards a cause. We can see them at different times. Companies try to do that. Let's say some companies are trying to support Shaukat Khanum Memorial Hospital for cancer research. So companies try to let the people know that their profits or their revenue is being shared with the consumer or cancer research area. This is what is called cause-related marketing, and it is very strongly linked with corporate social responsible behavior, but it's a little different. In the same way, like there was an example, if you recall, tsunami had come in the South Asia in 2004, and a lot of damage and everything happened. So one of the major designer outlets, for example, Armani, they started making T-shirts, and their approach was that anybody who bought the T-shirt, the money itself will go directly to the benefit of the affected people who had suffered in the tsunami. So these kind of companies tend to use this method to try and explain or give a message to the consumers that they are not only profit oriented purely, but they also take care of people who are less privileged. So in this kind of a situation, the impact comes on the corporate, and that is what we are saying, that by using these methods, the corporates tend to improve their brand credibility, and whenever the message goes out from such a company, it will be more credible. Now, we do understand that we have talked about the source credibility, but now we would like to look at particularly the spokesperson. Remember, I said we need to differentiate between the source, which is the commercial organization, and the the spokesperson. And we try and look at, okay, now how does the spokesperson itself? And I told you again that as we select ambassadors and spokespeople, we have to be very critically aware of this fact that they also contribute to the credibility of the message that we are trying to relay. We have to understand that there are also the credibility of the sponsor or the spokesperson is related to the message itself. For example, if it's a very highly technical message, it will become very redundant to have a very attractive model trying to talk about technical frameworks, because people will start doubting because they already know that this person has been, and it's not technically qualified, may not know the details as much as an engineer would. So when we try and look at the kind of message, we need to be very sure that the message and the spokesperson are compatible, they are congruent, they must link with each other. Similarly, for example, we look at the synergy between the kind of product or the endorser we have. We find that in number of ads for, let's say, the toothpaste, we will always find a dentist speaking about the quality of the toothpaste or how you protect your teeth and whatever you do. So that is what we normally have seen, and that is what normally is done, that whenever there is something technical which requires expertise, technical expertise, then the endorser or the spokesperson has to be of the same level, and people should be able to believe that. We've already seen, for example, in case of cosmetic or physical attractiveness products, which are like cosmetics, we have toiletries, we have fashion, we always find attractive models. However, when we are going to buy a camera, attractive model may not be the relevant person. It may be a good photographer who is well known in the environment to have taken good photographs, and therefore when he endorses the camera, it becomes more credible. It is then the same system by which we say that the target market and the endorser must have some kind of a relationship. Young age group person endorsing a product must be related to the same demographic of the target market. It will be a little incongruent, और जिसको हम कहते हैं तजाद आ जाएगा कि एक youngster is trying to sell a product which is targeted to elderly people, like insurance, for example, age-old benefits or pension plans. So it's logical to look at the pension plan target market, which is people who are going to retire, and then use couples who are of the same age group to be able to emphasize the importance of pension. A young person thinking of pension will become a little unsettling because there is no link. At that age, people don't think about pension. They think about growth in the business and growth in the jobs that they have, growth in their careers, and they're not thinking about pensions, which is what normally people do who are approaching pensionable age. So there has to be a logic of congruence between the message, whatever the message is, and the spokesperson and the target. So these three things have to be really looked at when we are looking at the frames. Now, we should also understand that spokesperson cannot replace the corporate brand. For example, if the corporate brand is not good or the company is not well established or well known, then a person who is attractive may not be able to contribute to the credibility because people already are aware that this company is not that good. And if the company is not good, it cannot be compensated by the attractiveness. There has to be this knowledge that both have to be on the same track or same level. It is also, let's say, the endorser, and we're talking about endorser at this point, like the ambassadors and the product. For example, again, if a person like a tennis star or a player of tennis, he's talking about a gel which kills pain or painkiller, then he can talk about how fast the pain is relieved. For example, he's talking about the pain in his elbow and he uses the gel or the ointment and the pain goes. He can explain how this has an impact or how fast the impact takes place when he uses it. But I doubt if he would to stand there and start explaining the technical ingredients or the chemicals which have gone in, because that is not his area. So we have to be very careful when we are talking about or using the endorsers to critically send the message. It is also important, and this now we bring into the direct person who is normally responsible to sell the product, and that is the salesperson. Again, the quality of the salesperson and his credibility is very critical. And it is said that sometimes, though the message is the same, obviously the message is this product is good, it will help you, it is of value to you, and so on and so forth in relation to competitive products. But it is said that even the way a salesperson approaches the person or looks the person in the eye would improve the credibility of the message. And we're talking about the credibility of the message, which is important before the message is accepted and the action will take place in terms of buying. So even before the buying process takes place, the message communicated by the salesperson is critical. So we see that some characteristics have been laid down that the salesperson must look honest. I mean, his facial expressions and his eyes would always suggest that he is honest and people should trust him. Again, if you are going to go and sell a car, and if you are driving a motorcycle, well, this will confuse the market. It will make the message totally not credible. The source, the spokesperson will not be accepted as the right person to give. And that is why sometimes salespersons are given good cars to drive. They are told to be well-dressed, because when you are well-dressed and you seem to be successful, it gives a message to the consumers who look at success as one indicator of credibility, of value. So if I'm trying to say that the product that I'm selling is of value, obviously the way I'm dressed up, the way I look, the way I approach would give a message to the, the consumer. And this message is not the direct communication, it is what we say the indirect communication taking place, and has a very important impact on credibility. It's also very simple that I'm just giving you an example. If the marketing is of a product which is like construction material or steel, we cannot expect a very smart looking tied up person who is wearing a suit talking about construction, when actually construction engineers and civil engineers normally wear a plastic hat. They have a different kind of work clothes. They more or less wear overalls, and that would therefore have a problem. So even the way a person is dressed has an impact on the credibility of the message. Okay, now once we have done this, we have discussed the source and the spokesperson which are grouped together. We now come to the message itself. We know, we should understand that message has to be believed. If the message is unbelievable, then whatever your efforts, doesn't make a difference who is speaking it, what organization it belongs to, where it goes, we have an issue coming through. Like I've already told you that even the source or the organization, its credibility is influenced by the retail outlet. It is in the same way that an ad would be affected by the retail outlet. And here I would like to bring that same example or a case study where exactly the same thing happened. And I have mentioned it before, but since this is a new context, I'll repeat the example and make sure that this logic is clearly understood. This example I had already given before, and at that point it was talking about positioning. And remember, we are now trying to link up the logic of positioning, because positioning is always affected by the way we communicate the position. So in that example also, I suggested that how the position was misinterpreted by the market and the product failed, or the organization failed. The product didn't fail, but the organization failed in actually positioning itself correctly. अब what had happened, अगर हम उसका थोड़ा तज्जिया करें उस केस का, तो what had happened basically is that a message was, the content of the message was of a very high quality product. But for some reason, the marketing manager of the company initially placed that product in very high-end outlets, which were always visited by people who normally live in the defense, who are very rich people, and it was targeted towards dowry for the rich people, for their for their daughters, for their sons, and so on and so forth. But at a point of time in the business of this organization, they placed the product in an industrial mela where everything is discounted. And suddenly, from there, they went towards anarkali shops and outlets in Anarkali, which is normally visited by the middle income or lower middle income or the lower class people with lesser incomes. So that is the place that they used to go. Now, when the ads started coming in the market again, or it was repeated, the people who had initially reacted to that positively started doubting the whole issue and started refusing to accept the point that this product was actually targeted towards them for dowry purposes, because now every person was buying it for the regular use, because suddenly, because of the way it was located and the other implications of prices coming down, everything contributed, and ultimately the product or the company failed. Though the product was good, the quality of the product was good, even the message that was initially launched was as good. But finally, because of this complete chaos in the system, not only from the message being decided to be incredible to the people who it was originally targeted, to the dropping of the pricing, which changed the positioning. And so this is the result of so many factors. And one of them is also, as we talked about, the kind of outlet that we sell a product, particularly if it's high class. Quality of the media also has an impact, a very strong impact on the credibility of the message. For example, if a company advertises in the Fortune magazine, the credibility of the message increases. On the other hand, and we can see that it normally happens even in Pakistan when we locate a product or what do you call an advertisement in an eveninger. ये जो eveninger होते हैं, ये वो newspapers हैं जो शाम को publish किए जाते हैं, या उनका वो standard नहीं समझा जाता जो morning के newspapers होते हैं, और उनमें भी there is a lot of what do you call levels and grades among the newspapers also. And every time you must select a medium, then it will obviously have an impact on the message itself, especially if the message is about quality and if the message is about a high-end product. We cannot confuse that also. So we have to be, as marketers, very focused that we cannot contribute these contradictions to that extent. What we need to do is to ensure that our product or our message is totally linked with the media that we are placing into it. It has been suggested that, let's say, CNN is there, we have news channels, there is also some humorous channels or comedy channels, there are some channels for the children. Now, logic suggests that the message that we are going to communicate, also the spokesperson, there has to be an integration, there has to be a congruence between all these factors. And it is not possible to use a medium, for example, a comedy, when you are talking about a very high-end product or high-quality product. So we need to be very careful in terms of using the media, because it will directly have an impact on the message credibility itself. When we look at, let's say, the magazines and we look at the journals, that is why when it is a highly technical product, we will try to locate our message on the technically related journals or magazines. If you are looking for a car, it would go to a magazine which is auto related. If you are placing a camera it will most probably, particularly if it's angled at technological advances, then it goes to the magazines which are normally related to the cameras and so on and so forth. So we have to be very clear that we need to be specific when we are using the medium. We have a number of other areas that we have. Why? Because as time has passed, we can see that consumers have more and more options available. And previously, we only had newspapers and some magazines, but now we have televisions, we have computer or website-oriented medium. So we need to be very critically aware of the fact that whatever our message will have an impact on the message credibility. इस हवाले से there is a lot of research which has undertaken, particularly polls जो होते हैं. अब polls को समझने में थोड़ा सा एक point आप जहन में रखें. ये normally किसी भी issue के हवाले से लोगों से सवाल पूछा जाता है और ये सवाल बड़े simplistic होते हैं और उन पे yes no के answer होते हैं और इस किस्म की चीज़ की जाती है. Normally we have seen this happening in America, particularly when people are asked to assess the performance of their presidents. उस रिजल्ट और उसकी जो रिजल्ट स्टडीज में हुई हैं वो ये सजेस्ट करती हैं कि इफ दिस काइंड ऑफ अ पोल व्हिच मींस इफ दिस काइंड ऑफ अ सर्वे वाज अंडरटेकन ऑनलाइन थ्रू द कंप्यूटर बेस्ड तो उसकी क्रेडिबिलिटी कम मानी गई है. ऑन द अदर साइड अगर वही सर्वे या वही पोल अगर किया गया बाय लेट्स से सम वेरी रिप्यूटेबल मैगजीन लाइक टाइम्स मैगजीन और न्यूज़ वीक और फॉर्च्यून तो उसकी क्रेडिबिलिटी उसी हवाले से बहुत ज़्यादा थी. हालांकि दोनों के जो रिजल्ट्स थे वो अगर बराबर भी हों स्टिल इट वाज डिटरमिन्ड कि डिपेंडिंग ऑन द मीडिया उसकी क्रेडिबिलिटी को ज़्यादा क्या नाम है अहमियत दी गई और इट वाज कंसिडर्ड टू बी मोर ट्रूअर देन मैसेज विच वाज और अ सर्वे विच वाज रिपोर्टेड ऑनलाइन. तो ये दिस इज़ व्हाट वी आर ट्राइंग टू सजेस्ट और दिस इज़ ऑल बीन डिटरमिन्ड थ्रू कंज्यूमर रिसर्च. अब हम आते हैं टाइम का फैक्टर. वी नीड टू सी कि टाइम जब गुजरता है तो उसका इम्पैक्ट क्रेडिबिलिटी पे क्या है और कैसे होता है. नाउ वी शुड अंडरस्टैंड कि ये जो क्रेडिबिलिटी का केस है ये भी हमेशा के लिए नहीं होता और इसका भी असर जो है वो डिपेंड्स ऑन नंबर ऑफ एरियाज ऑफ द मैसेज. फॉर एग्जाम्पल इफ देयर इज अ नेगेटिव message or a negative framework has been created by a message itself और वो हो सकता है source की वजह से हुआ हो तो at a point of time people will forget the source but remember the message, which means basically कि time as it passes तो एक concept है जिसको हम बोलते हैं sleeper effect यानी कि सोने वाला यानी कि सो जाने का इफेक्ट जो है वो होता है कि एक टाइम जब आप जाग रहे थे तो मैसेज वाज वेरी क्लियर, यू रिमेंबर इवन द एंडोर्सर, यू रिमेंबर द सोर्स, बट देन ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम slowly you start forgetting the source as well as the what do you call the organization or the spokesperson and you start only remembering the content. Now that becomes very significant because अगर content याद हो और उसका source भूल जाए तो the impact जो desired result है वो you've already lost because आपका concept let's say ये था कि product खरीदेगा या खरीदना चाहिए. अब अगर इंसान यही भूल जाए कि इसके पीछे कंपनी कौन सी थी और उसको सिर्फ ये याद रहे कि मैसेज था प्रोडक्ट खरीदना तो देयर इज अ क्लैश ऑफ इंटरेस्ट बिटवीन द टू फैक्टर्स. दिस बिकम्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट और ये भी डिस्कवर किया गया कि अगर पॉजिटिव इफेक्ट है या नेगेटिव है दोनों में से जो भी है तो उसका मोर और लेस 6 हफ्ते में यानी 6 हफ्तों में उसका इम्पैक्ट जायल हो जाता है, विच इज why then we need to think about repeating a message. और ये जो repetition of the messages है उसके भी कुछ frames हैं. हमने पहले भी डिस्कस किया था कि मैसेज को कितनी दफ़ा दोहराया जाए. अब हम ये देख रहे हैं कि after what time should the message be repeated so that if there is a positive impact the impact can stay. और अगर हमें ये पता चल जाए हमारी कंपनी में कि जो हमारा सोर्स था या स्पोक्स पर्सन था उसका इमेज नेगेटिव क्रिएट हो गया है और क्रेडिबिलिटी पर इफेक्ट आया है, सो इट डजंट मीन दैट वी शुड पैनिक or it doesn't mean that we have lost everything. What it basically means is that we have a gap of 6 weeks before we can reapply the message using a new spokesperson or a new endorser. और अगर आप गौर करें तो यही हो रहा है. मैंने आपको I just gave you an example of Tiger Wood, जिससे कई ब्रांड्स ने उससे स्पोक्समैनशिप या जो उसकी इंडोर्समेंट थी या एम्बेसडरशिप थी वो उन्होंने विड्रॉ कर ली है, और अभी उनके कोई भी एड्स उस हवाले से नहीं आ रहे. और उसकी वजह तकरीबन यही है दैट दे आर अवेयर ऑफ दिस फैक्ट दैट अबाउट 6 weeks डाउन द रोड the people will forget about the endorser, they will forget about Tiger Woods as being the real person who used to promote Tag Heuer and so on and so forth. And then when we bring in a new spokesperson, a new ambassador, the positive impact of the product or the brand will revive itself. And that is why we must make sure that over a period of time, we reinforce the message, particularly अगर हमें ये पता है कि negative impact आ गया, and we have to be able to quickly change. और अगर यहीं आप याद रखें that we were talking about the feedback system, तो feedback system का मकसद ही ये है to immediately respond to the positivity or negativity of the message, whether it is through adjusting the content or changing the spokesperson. Or this is what we have been talking about, कि these effects which should be understood by the marketer. Otherwise, there are a number of dangers in getting a wrong position only because the market is not really believing what the message is all about. Now we move into the third aspect. Remember, we have talked about the source, we have talked about the message, we have talked about the medium and how the credibility is affected. Now we are coming into the target area, and how does the message credibility is affected by the target itself. That means how does the credibility of the message becomes influenced by the consumer or the target market which is listening to this message. Now we should understand कि जो decoding है, क्योंकि हमारा मकसद इस वक्त यही है कि जो मैसेज दिया जा रहा है, that consumer must be able to interpret the message in exactly the same way as the sender had intended. तो उसमें पहला जो इशू है वो इज द पर्सन और द कंज्यूमर हिमसेल्फ. उसके अपने करेक्टरिस्टिक्स हैं, उसके करेक्टरिस्टिक्स इन टर्म्स ऑफ द कंटेंट, द मैसेज इटसेल्फ, द एबिलिटी ऑफ द पर्सन टू इंटरप्रेट द मैसेज, द अपॉर्चुनिटी ऑफ द पर्सन टू बी एबल टू इंटरप्रेट द मैसेज, and finally the motivation of the target. So we will try and look at all of these things one by one and see how does the personal characteristics of the target has an impact on the credibility of the message, and how does the message get wrongly communicated. इसका एक छोटा सा example ये है कि in universities we find that there are certain professors who are very serious looking. They seem to be very serious, very impressive. तो कई दफ़ा students उनकी इस seriousness को उनके grading system से link करने की कोशिश करते हैं, and they assume that this person is so serious, therefore his grading would be very strict. Now you can see what is happening. What is happening is that the interpretation of the message of the seriousness is being wrongly drawn by the consumer, and that is the student. He is making a wrong interpretation of the person's seriousness, और वो उसको कुछ और रंग दे रहा है. इस एरिया में वी हैव टू बी वेरी केयरफुल, और इसके ऊपर जो कंज्यूमर की पर्सनल लर्निंग है और उसका जो पास्ट है वो इस पे very substantially it has an impact. For example, the same case that I'm talking about, ये उसी वक्त होगा कि एक स्टूडेंट के साथ किसी पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम में उसके पिछले बैकग्राउंड में serious faculty who is very serious has also been very strict in marking. So when he finds this new professor who may be very normal or average in his marking scheme, but if he is serious, the student's interpretation would be कि नहीं, marking जो है बहुत सख्त की जाएगी. So therefore prior learning और उसका अपना attitude जो है, that has an impact on the message content or the message that is being given. उस पे उसकी credibility पर असर होता है. research, for example, has suggested कि gender जो है male और females में जो charity के messages होते हैं उन पे जो उनकी credibility है charity के messages की वो women and men पे उनका totally different असर होता है. For example, if it's an emotional message for charity, so women will believe it more. Men may not tend to believe whatever the charity is suggesting in terms of emotionalism. और ये काफ़ी हद तक क्या नाम है देखा गया है. And also when there is a technical kind of a message which is coming through, it is seen that men believe it more because there are comparison taking place, whereas a woman would be more attuned to emotional side of the message, and therefore we have to be very careful to see कि जो target market है या target है जिसको communicate किया जा रहा है उसके characteristics क्या हैं. Now the next factor is, like I said, the motivation of the person, and motivation is reflected in the kind of involvement that the person has in the product. और उसमें हमें पता है, we were talking about when we were talking about the concept of involvement, कि जो ज़्यादा involved होते हैं they are more affected by the kind of message that is given. If you are very involved and you are cognitively related to the product or the brand, then you are more attuned to the technical frameworks. Therefore, if the technical frameworks or the technical information is given completely, the information will be believed to be more credible than if the same information is given in an emotional frame or creating images which is not related to the kind of technical details that may be required. We are now drawing to the conclusion of the topic that we were discussing in this class, and that is credibility. Credibility of the message, the media, the target, and we are going to talk about very shortly on one of the aspects of the target market. We have already discussed the characteristics. Finally, we have what is left is called the mood. We have been in research, it has been discovered and determined that mood also has an influence on decoding of the message. And let's remind you again कि हम decoding को समझने की कोशिश ऐसे करते हैं कि whatever the message was being sent, whether it's cheerful, whether it is sad, whether it is emotional, must be received in the same way. Now the issue is that this aspect is also influenced by the mood of the target. For example, it is discovered that a person who is happy or cheerful, the person will be more attuned to believing a humorous ad than emotional ad. On the other side, if the person is emotionally unhappy or sad, the impact would be more stronger from an emotional kind of an ad. It is in the same way that we find that those products which create physical attractiveness like fashion, perfumes, toiletries, etc., normally tend to use feelings and emotions to promote themselves. On the other hand, we have also discovered in research that positive mood enhances the memory of the consumers and they retain the brand names more effectively. Finally, we should also remember that it is not only that the mood influences the decoding of the message, but the consumer's mood gets also influenced by the ad content and context. That means if it's a good ad, a person will have a mood change and that will influence his purchase behavior. Now, we are more or less covered all the details. I'll stop here for this the period, and in the next class, I will pick up the barriers to proper communication, and we will look at factors which affect other aspects of our understanding other than the credibility of the messages. So in the final context, let me quickly recapitulate that we have constantly been discussing the credibility of the message through various areas: the source, the message content itself, the media, and the target or the target market or the people who are going to be listening to the message. This brings us to the conclusion. Next class, I will pick up the barriers. For now, Allah Hafiz. Thank you very much.